Want to know what automatically makes this game full of win? Gangsters fighting Rambo. Not quite as crazy an idea as Superman fighting twin clones of Hitler in the comic book Superman at Earth's End, but I digress. Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Crime Fighter, which, believe it or not, has nothing to do with fighting crime. The name is instead alluding to the fact that you play as a crime lord fighting for control of all of the illegal activity in the city. Yeah, that's right, you play as the bad guy in this game. Well, I should actually say bad guys, because at its heart, this is a multiplayer game. Though playing it single player is perfectly fine too, it's just because of the nature of the game, winning is inevitable. So the real question is, how long does it take you to win, and can you win before everyone else? Well, now I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's get those game stats out of the way. Crime Fighter was created and released by Peter Stephan in 1993, and while it does have many puzzle and strategy elements mixed in, it is ultimately a 1 to 4 player board game. It supports high-resolution EGA 640x350 16-color graphics, which look fairly decent widescreen, but only has PC speaker sound. Granted, the game is pretty silent to begin with. As for its current release date, Peter Stephan re-released the game as freeware in 2002, and thus it can be downloaded directly from his website at www.pssoft.de. There's also a beta version of a Windows remake of this game available on his website, though it's virtually the exact same game, just with updated graphics. So yeah, the whole premise of the game is that you've just been released from the slammer and are trying to commit as many crimes as possible in order to establish yourself as the reigning overlord of all criminal activities in whereversville. Granted, since all the money in the game are Dutch marks, we can safely assume that this fictional crime-laden city is somewhere in Germany. Before you begin the game, each player chooses a name for themselves and their gang, and rolls their 3 primary stats: strength, intelligence, and brutality. I should note that strength is also sometimes referred to in-game as staying power instead. In any case, these stats range from 1 to 99 points, and if you're really unlucky, they're going to start really low. Thankfully, these numbers don't factor into the game as much as one might imagine, and eventually, with enough cash, you can max them all out anyways, so starting low is annoying, but not encumbering. You also have to choose how many points will win the game. The higher you set this number, the more points you need to reach the various criminal ranks. As you gain ranks, certain decisions in-game will begin to have more favorable results, with the most important rank being Crook, since once you obtain this rank, you can finally enlist more members into your gang. As said, Crime Fighter is essentially a board game, so each player takes turns running through the city. When a player starts their turn, they get information about any automatic things that are happening, and are then given the opportunity to look at their stats, run through the city, engage in a gang war with another player, sleep out their turn, change the game options, or quit the game. You can also save and load games in progress, and can change the number of points needed to win the game on the fly, just in case you want to shorten the game or make it go a bit longer. The city itself serves as the board you're going to be playing on and has a ton of locations to visit. It'd take way too long to go over each location in detail, so instead I'm going to talk about how you get yourself going and the things you should be doing in order to survive. First though, it's a good idea to get familiar with the information shown on the city screens. You have a map of the entire city in the top right, along with buttons to highlight specific buildings, or to enlarge the full map to get a better idea of which locations are near which. Further down the sidebar is your money and the number of steps you have left. Once you run out of steps, your turn is over. Since you earn points by committing crimes, the first thing you need to figure out is what crimes you should be committing. Almost every location you can visit has at least one criminal activity you can perform, and some have multiple, but the way you get started should be based on how experienced you are with the game and what your starting stats are like. Let's say you're completely new at the game and started with absolutely dreadful stats. Your best bet to make some money in this case is to steal cargo containers at the docks at the top of the map, since this is not only one of the very few activities you can perform multiple times on a single turn, but unless you screw it up, you'll never get caught either. The only catch is that you'd better at least know how to play Sokoban. For those unfamiliar with the concept, Sokoban is a box-pushing puzzle game where the objective is to push boxes onto specially marked spaces, but you can only push one box at a time and you can't pull the boxes. So this means it's possible to push boxes into obstructive spaces, and it's also possible to get yourself trapped, making it impossible to win the puzzle. Here in Crime Fighter, you don't have to push all of the shipping containers onto the marked spaces, but the more you do, the more money you'll make. The only catch is that you have to make your way through the exit before time runs out, otherwise you'll be confronted by the police. If you end up in a police confrontation, you have two choices: escape or bribe. Escape puts you into a special minigame where you have to avoid touching a police officer for 20 seconds. Fail and you have to fight the police. Bribing lets you pay money to go on your merry way, but even this won't work sometimes because the police will just take your money and then try to arrest you for bribing them, again forcing you to fight them. I'll talk more about the combat later. If you're new to the game and started with really good stats, primarily intelligence, then you may opt to gamble at the casinos instead. So long as your intelligence rating is really high, your odds of winning at the casinos will be substantially better than your odds of losing, thus allowing you to rack up some easy cash. But unlike stealing cargo containers, gambling doesn't count towards your score or your rank, so sooner or later you'll need to stop and actually start committing some crimes if you want to win. One side note about the casino, you have 3 game choices there: blackjack, poker, and roulette, with winning decided at random rather than having you actually play those games. You're most likely to win blackjack and least likely to win roulette, but the differences between the odds are very minor once your intelligence is maxed out, and the winnings from roulette are far greater than from blackjack. So once you have your intelligence maxed out, never play anything except roulette at the casinos. However, if you're already experienced at this game, then your best way to get cash early on is to rob banks. Not by holding up the tellers, but by breaking into the safes. This is actually really tricky to do your first few times, since you have to set 3 numbers, listening for very subtle changes in the sounds of the dials, and you only have 8 seconds to do this, otherwise the alarm goes off. Thankfully, once you have all 3 numbers right, the safe auto-opens, so once you're sure about the first 2 numbers, just scroll that 3rd one as fast as you can. Your very first goal in this game should be to max out your stats and arm yourself with a machine gun. You do both of these by visiting the arms dealers scattered throughout the city. Granted, if your intelligence and brutality ratings are too low, you won't be allowed to acquire a machine gun, so raising those values should definitely come first. Especially since the more crimes you commit, the more expensive everything gets, so maxing out your stats early on should be a priority. If only 1 or 2 stats are low, it's best to train them individually, though if all 3 of your stats need a boost, you can perform combination training, which is a little cheaper than trying to train them one at a time. Now, out of all 5 arms dealers, only one of them is going to sell machine guns. Remember which one this is, even if you're playing multiplayer and it's not your turn, because later on as you commit more and more crimes, this specific arms dealer will be more and more likely to stock grenades, which are the most powerful weapon you can acquire. They don't have the same range as the machine gun, but are far more likely to score a hit. If the arms dealer doesn't have them in stock, just leave and go back in a couple or 3 times, and that could very well change. But if it doesn't, then you'll probably have to wait until your next increase in rank. Once you've got the skill and the hardware, it's time to start causing havoc. First, you should probably steal yourself a car, either from a villa in the bottom left of the map, or from one of the car dealers scattered around. Car dealers have a better selection than the villas, but the villas are safer to steal from. Once you have a car, your number of steps per turn increases greatly, and you'll be able to use the expressways on the sides of the map to move around even faster. Though if you're willing to spend some money, you can take the train from the top left corner to the bottom right, or vice versa, or you can take the underground transit system. As you gain points and rise in rank, you're probably going to want to start committing lots of petty crimes to really get your points going. This usually amounts to holding up the convenience stores and hotels around the map. You may also want to invest in a hotel suite so that you can kidnap children and political figures. Kidnapping really doesn't work too well in this game for ransoms, so instead the best thing to do is to kidnap a child from a playground or villa, then sell the child into a life of servitude at one of the pubs. Yeah, this game has no mercy. Speaking of kidnapping political figures, that's one of the things that can trigger another one of the minigames, where you have no time limit and are trying to get from one point to another without being spotted by a security guard. And these sections can be brutal unless you keep one very important tip in mind. The guards can see in every direction except the direction they came from, and they can only spot you with a direct line of sight in one of the 4 cardinal directions. Keeping these aspects in mind, this particular minigame shouldn't be too challenging. Actually, going back to the pubs, you're going to be spending a lot of time at them, either selling stolen goods, looking for missions to take on, or once your rank is high enough, scouting for gangsters to join your cause. You can only have a grand total of 10 members in your gang, and once you sign one on, there's no going back on the choice. So I highly recommend only signing on the expensive gangsters, the ones who demand at least 3,500 marks or more. If they only want 3,000 or less, steer clear, because they're going to take a lot of money to train and equip. That said, there's not really a huge benefit to having such a massive gang in this game. The larger your gang gets, the more police officers you have to fight whenever you end up fighting them, and the more money it costs to do things that require the entire gang's involvement, such as getting passports and taking the mass transit systems. On the plus side though, you'll be far less likely to lose combat with anyone. So, let's talk combat. The combat in this game is very straightforward. On your turn, you perform actions with each of your gangsters in sequence until you've gone through all of them, then it's the opponent's turn to do the same. The default action is to move a single space in any direction indicated by a white frame around the selected gangster, but by clicking the right mouse button or by pressing enter on the keyboard, the white frame turns black, and now pressing or clicking in a particular direction will attack instead. The goal of combat is to eliminate all of your enemies before all of your gang members are taken out instead. At the start of the game, combat is a lot simpler because you'll either be totally outnumbered, or the way to win will simply be to back up as far as you can, then just gun down the enemies with a machine gun. If you don't at least have a machine gun though, you're probably not going to win. If you fail combat against the police, you get arrested, lose some points, and miss a number of turns depending on your current rank, and whether or not you paid a lawyer to fight the case or not. However, if you fail combat against another criminal group without being noticed by legit people, you'll simply be ejected back to the map. To be perfectly frank, you want to avoid combat as much as possible. I mean, no one dies in this game, and there is a bit of strategy to the combat, but there's a lot of random chance too, so the more you can avoid combat, the better. This is why I don't recommend performing crimes in this game that require you to engage in combat, such as attacking mail trains. Yes, you get a ton of money from doing that, but it's a lot of work and only worth a single point, whereas robbing a bank, a hotel, and a convenience store all in one turn would be worth roughly the same amount of money and 3 points instead of 1. And if you do end up in combat with the hotel or convenience store, your opponents are very likely just going to be some unarmed tough guys, and I think it goes without saying that guns beat fists. So yeah, there's a bunch of things I didn't talk about, but I'm sure you get the gist of the game, and really, since this game is freeware now and easy to get running in DOSBox, you might as well download a copy and try it for yourself, regardless of how old you are. Yet, since the game doesn't actually have any gore or swearing or nudity or prostitution or anything like that, it's surprisingly child-safe considering all of the illegal things you end up doing to win, and I really feel that this game benefits from that. Speaking as a game designer, it's not going for shock value, it's riding on the merits of its gameplay, and while it isn't a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, well, your imagination is what fills in the gaps, making it completely playable by anyone. And it really is an easy game to just pick up and play, even if you have no idea what you're doing. DOSBox settings are interesting this time around. If all you want to do is play the game the way it was originally designed, just set cycles to max and you're good to go. However, if you're like me and you like to tweak these settings to give more desirable results, then here's some additional settings you can try out. Though again, the game works perfectly fine just setting cycles to max. Now personally, I find the sound effects are a little too slow for my tastes, not to mention the speed of the bullets in combat. Well, interestingly enough, these things are timed out when the game starts up, but all primary gameplay aspects are based off of the system clock instead. So what you can do is set the cycles count to a fixed value, in my case 10,000, then set the cycle up parameter to about 20% of that, so in my case 2,000. Then, once the title screen shows up, I simply hit Ctrl F12 to bring the cycles up to 12,000. This has no effect on the gameplay itself, but speeds up the bullets and the sound effects without making them seem too fast. And I find I like the game better that way. One other thing you can do too if you have a widescreen monitor is to first of all make sure that your output type is set to DDRAW or OpenGL, depending on if your operating system is Windows or anything else. Then set the full resolution to your screen's native resolution, which in my case is 1920 by 1080. Then turn off aspect correction. Because this game runs at 640 by 350 resolution, these settings will stretch the game to fill the entire widescreen. A lot of 640 by 350 EGA games actually benefit from this, and combined with your favorite scaler, this makes the game look really nice on a widescreen display. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week in episode 75, we're going to take a look at an RPG with dual wielding. And no, it's not Skyrim. Come on, this is a show about DOS games. Besides, the maximum experience level in Skyrim is 81. The maximum experience level in the game I'm going to be looking at is 10. If you think you know which game it is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see it in action.